What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. This is going to be the first episode in a summer-long draft strategy series I'll be doing every single Sunday. This video will be a deep dive into why I built the simulations, how I built them, and how we're going to use them each week to uncover the best strategies in drafts. So sit back, hit the like button, and let's hop into things. So the most important question here is why I built the simulations. Why simulate 500 years worth of data when we could just look back at what's happened in the past? My main goal was to try and solve Best Ball Mania 4 on Underdog. For those of you who don't know, it's their largest tournament each year. I think this year it's like $3 million to first place. So wanted to try and solve that. So I started researching, right? I looked at the data they provided publicly. I looked at sites like Establish the Run, 4for4, Fantasy Points, really just like, the leading math-based fantasy sites to see what sort of analysis they had done. And what I found was that while incredibly interesting, a lot of the findings aren't super actionable. You can know what type of what build types have found the most success over the last 3 years, how impactful ADP value is, how important stacking is, things like that, but all based off of just 3 seasons of data. And that just didn't sit well with me. 3 years simply isn't a large enough sample size to truly understand trends. You'll be able to find what strategies are optimal over those years, but it's only over those years, right? Like, what if Travis Kelce had gotten hurt last season? What if a late round quarterback had truly broken out? Like, remember back to Lamar Jackson's MVP season back in 2019. Well, Underdog didn't even exist back then. So even an outcome that recent isn't included in anyone's analysis, even though it's very possible to occur again. Everyone is effectively just overfitting on 3 years of data, which is a huge problem. Why? Well, I simulated 500 years worth because that's how long it took to stabilize the results. I initially tried running 30 years of data because I was like, 30 years seems like enough, right? If you had 30 years of underdog drafts, you probably should know what's been happening over time. But even that wasn't enough. If you rerun the results for another new 30 years, the results change. So for someone to be telling you what's optimal over only 3 years, again, it's interesting to look at. It's really cool to look at that analysis, but it's not close to enough data to trust. And thus, my simulation project was born. I created a model that will simulate 500 years worth of seasons that you can feed different strategies into, and it'll tell you how many points that build will score on average over an entire season. For the rest of this video, I'm going to talk about how that was done. And then in every single Sunday after this week until week 1, we're going to highlight one optimal strategy per week that the builds found. And I'll show you an example team. My goal is each week to show you a team that I drafted. I think I have the first one already set up. So my goal is to try and do an actual draft, get an actual team using the strategy. Sometimes it won't be possible, and I'll have to show you an example team given ADPs, what you could end up with. My goal is to show you actual teams that I drafted that week to show you an example of how it can work right now. And one quick shout out before we start. For those of you who don't draft on Underdog, number one, you should. It's really fun. And I'll be going over a promo later in the video that I'm sure a lot of you are really going to love. But also, if you still don't want to, then understand I did the project twice. I did it once for Best Ball and once for redraft leagues. The logic has to be slightly different because, as I'm sure you know, in Best Ball, it sets your starting lineup each week. In redraft, you have to set it. So obviously you have to tell the models in one of them set a lineup and one of them don't. And then of course, ADPs are different. So in one model, I'm using redraft ADPs. In another, I'm using Best Ball. But everything else is exactly the same. So everything I go over, if you don't do Underdog, pretend I'm saying redraft. So let's talk about some math. First step in the project is that you need to just get player outcomes, right? Like you need to get a bunch of outcomes that are possible when you draft a player. To do that, I simply gathered all play-by-play data since the year 2000, calculated how many underdog fantasy points each of those players scored each week, what their total was over the season. Very simple to do that. Then you cluster by performance and by position. So among quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, you separate all of those, cluster within positions. That's going to give you, a top tier of quarterback that consists of like Travis Kelce, the best seasons under Gronk, Mark Andrews' best seasons, Tony Gonzalez's best seasons, everyone since 2000. What are like the best of the best at tight end? Then a tier below that, you're going to get players like, Dawson Knox, Dalton Schultz, Pat Freiermuth, Gerald Everett from last season, outcomes like that. It's just going to cluster everyone into groupings of how good they are. Now, the actual names assigned to these box scores, completely irrelevant. All we are doing is trying to find box scores from a bunch of different players and positions and clustering those together. But then we take things one step further. We say, okay, having all these outcomes is great, but there aren't enough possible outcomes. Like Travis Kelce scored 22.1 fantasy points in week 1 last year, 7.6 in week 2. But he could have easily flipped those two results, right? He could have scored 7 and then 22. Maybe he could have scored 18 and then 11. And so if we only include the results that actually occurred, it is entirely possible the model will overfit on those outcomes, since again, we're not working with that many seasons in the grand scheme of things. And among those seasons, what it really is the sample size of like Travis Kelce like years. We don't want to overfit on only a few outcomes. We need to create more. So to solve this, we can use machine learning to create thousands of player results based off of each cluster. So we've got, 10,000 seasons of elite running backs, 10,000 seasons of mediocre running backs. What about running backs like Breece Hall, who started off hot and then got hurt? Or like Cam Akers last season, started off trash and then ended strong. We need all of these outcomes and a bunch of all of them. So you create thousands of examples of these seasons, and then we can randomly pull from them when we're testing out different draft strategies. After that comes the most important part. We have to calculate the odds of drafting a player in each cluster depending on where you are in the draft. That should be very intuitive. The odds of drafting, a Travis Kelce like tight end is effectively 0% when you are in round 17, but it's much higher if you're picking from the 7th pick, right? So we need to know, what are the odds of getting elite running back at pick 1 versus pick 12? The odds of getting elite tight end is a mid-first versus a late 2nd round pick. That's something you have to get right, because the simulations are based off of those odds, right? For redraft, you're able to go a little bit further back and use results from when best ball wasn't even created, but understand that for best ball, obviously we're working with fewer seasons of data because best ball hasn't been around for as long. Once you have those odds of picking each cluster for each position for every pick, then you have to actually create the draft combinations, right? You have to create draft combinations that are like running back, tight end, running back, wide receiver, all those for all of the rounds. And let me tell you, there are a lot of combinations. There are 18 rounds on Underdog. You have 4 different positions you could draft in every single one of those rounds. You don't have to be a math wizard to know that is far too many combinations to actually run unless you had thousands of supercomputers for millions of years. Like, you're just not going to get through all those combinations. But we actually don't care about a lot of the combinations, right? Like, no one is starting off with 5 straight tight ends. No one is starting off, or I guess finishing a draft with only like 2 or 3 wide receivers. Maybe someone will, but I shouldn't have to tell you that's not optimal, right? So by creating basic rules, we can greatly reduce the number of total possible combinations. So I know this has been a lot so far. Here is a super quick, easy to understand example of what it looks like to simulate a draft combination. So let's say we have a combination that starts off running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and we want to simulate that from the 4th overall pick, the 1.0 104. We'll start off in round 1, running back. We asked the model to roll a dice effectively and tell me what tier of running back I just drafted. Again, my odds at the 104 of picking an elite running back are pretty high, but as we saw last season with someone like Jonathan Taylor, who you could have gotten in that general range, not 100%, right? Jonathan Taylor did not have an elite season at running back. So the model's going to roll a dice. It's going to have odds of drafting each tier, and it's going to land on one of them. And it's going to say, okay, you picked a tier 2 running back with that pick. The model then randomly selects a tier 2 running back, adds them to the team, and then just repeats that process for every single round, calculates your weekly points, calculates your end of season points, stores that. That whole thing represents one simulated season. Initially, like I said before, the plan was to run 30 seasons for every single combination. I figured that would be enough to stabilize the results. It was not. It took 500 years to stabilize the results. And believe me, I wish it took less time, since I'm the one running these simulations 24/7 for 3 straight months. But it did actually take that long for a build to see effectively the same point outcome if you reran the results. If I had stuck with 30 years, then you wouldn't be able to trust the results, because if I ran it again, they would change. And that's why I love this project so much, because even though a good chunk of the data for Underdog is based off of the last 3 years, we don't have a huge sample size of best ball data. We have more than just the last 3 years, but not a ton more. I love this project because it shows that results can vary wildly from year to year. And if 99.9% of the people we are drafting against, either, let's be honest, some don't even care about draft strategy, don't even take it into account, or the vast majority is using only a 3-year sample, well, we know we're gaining a massive edge over the field by completing a project like this. And that is where the Underdog promo comes in. I want all of you to see the results of this study and take advantage this season, because I'm sure another site is going to steal this idea, feature it next year. But there's no way anyone can watch this video, replicate the results, and have that ready this season. There's just not enough time left. So what I've done is I've partnered with Underdog to get all of you access to not only the findings of the study. I neatly package the findings into an app on the website that tells you what positions are best and worst to draft given how you've started the draft. And then also there's a page you can look at and clearly kind of see what strategies result in the most success over time. You'll not only have access to that, but also all of the articles I've written doing a deep dive into the optimal strategy findings, and then my custom rankings that you can upload directly to Underdog in seconds, have them populate as your pre-draft rankings, whether you're drafting from your computer at home or from your phone when you're on vacation somewhere. My rankings will populate wherever you're drafting. All you have to do is sign up for your first Underdog account using promo code FFA and make a minimum of a $10 deposit. Underdog will then double whatever you deposited up to $100. So if you deposit $50, they'll make it $100. You deposit $100, they'll make it $200. And I will send you your login information to my website within 24 to 48 hours. That's it. Just sign up with my promo code, deposit minimum $10, and you will gain access. So if you have any questions about the project, ask away in the comment section below. You can ask away in our free Discord, which you can find a link to in the description box. And then remember that every Sunday from next week on, we're going to do a deep dive into one optimal strategy that the model found with an example team that either I drafted or I got close to drafting, and I'm going to show you an example of. And we're going to walk through the draft, talk about why it works, how good it is, when you should be using it, tips for using it, all of those things, again, every single Sunday for the rest of the offseason. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of that. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? How about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.